Welcome to today's Explainer. I am so thrilled you're joining us because, honestly, we're tackling one of the most pressing and really deeply human questions of our time. Today, we're going to unpack exactly why human agency, our own unique intrinsic capacities, is actually the ultimate safety net for artificial intelligence. We constantly hear these stories about AI taking over, but as we're going to see in the research today, keeping humans right at the center isn't just some nice philosophical idea. It's an absolute structural necessity for safety. There's this fantastic quote from an essay on intuition encased in the age of AI, and it perfectly sets the stage for us. It says, "These systems never tire, but they also don't yet care. Caring, for now, remains a human responsibility." It's such a great framing, right? We've built these massive external systems, data pipelines, algorithms, and they can just run 24/7 while we sleep. They sort, they summarize, they sift. But for all their immense processing power, they completely lack the capacity to actually care. And that friction, that gap between mere measurement and actual meaning, that's exactly where we step in. Which brings us to a really urgent question. I want you to just think about this for a second. Who is ultimately responsible for AI? When a system makes a terrible error, or, on the flip side, when it achieves something completely remarkable, where does the buck stop? This is absolutely not just a fun thought experiment. It's a very real legal, ethical, and societal puzzle that industries all over the globe are frantically trying to figure out right now. Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, the AI responsibility gap. So let's talk about this illusion floating around that we can just, outsource our morality to machines. The reality is that ultimately somewhere in the chain, there is a human responsible, whether we want to admit it or not. Interestingly enough, some of the sharpest thinking on this actually comes from a group of theologians in the Evangelical Statement of Principles on Artificial Intelligence. Their main argument is super striking. They say it's not just that humans shouldn't hand over moral accountability to computers, it's that we literally cannot. Even with fully autonomous systems like self-driving cars or medical diagnostic algorithms, a human agent set the parameters, gathered the training data, and made the ultimate call to hit deploy. The whole idea of a responsibility gap, it's just a myth. Moving right along to Section 2, measuring AI risk. So if humans are fundamentally on the hook, how do we practically map out that responsibility in the real world? Well, researchers calculate these stakes using a really clever risk matrix that crosses two vital metrics: model influence and decision consequence. Think about it like this. If an AI has high influence over a decision and the consequence of that decision is also high, boom, you land in the red zone, high risk. Conversely, low influence and low consequence land you in low risk. It's an incredibly useful tool because it stops us from treating, say, a social media algorithm and a literal medical device like they pose the exact same level of danger. Let's break those two metrics down just a bit more, starting with model influence. This is defined as the relative weight, or the extent, to which an AI system's outputs shape outcomes and drive decisions. Basically, how much power does the AI have in the realm? Is it making the absolute final, unreviewed decision to approve someone's mortgage? Well, that is high influence. Or is it just offering a quick grammar suggestion while you're typing up an email? Helpful, for sure, but totally low influence. The second half of that equation is decision consequence. This looks at the potential impact if the AI just gets it completely wrong. It measures the severity of the harm, the probability of it happening, and whether we could even detect the error before the damage is done. If an AI misidentifies a tumor in a clinical setting, the consequence is extremely high. We're talking life and death here. On the other hand, if a spam filter accidentally tosses your favorite newsletter into the junk folder, the consequence is pretty minimal. Now, these concepts aren't just theoretical. They map directly onto the globally recognized ISO 31000 risk assessment process. By forcing organizations to sit down and formally identify model influence and analyze decision consequence, we completely avoid the two biggest traps of AI governance. We don't underestimate the real serious dangers of a deployment, but we also don't paralyze innovation by freaking out over the risks of a perfectly benign tool. It's just a brilliant systematic way to evaluate risk. All right, let's pivot to Section 3, human oversight mechanisms. Once we've nailed down the risk level, how do we physically keep the AI playing nice? We use a spectrum of human control. There are three primary frameworks here, and they map perfectly to those risk levels we just talked about. They are human in command, human in the loop, and human on the loop. You can basically picture this as a sliding scale of human authority, moving from absolute maximum control down to much more passive supervision. Starting at the very top, for those high-risk scenarios, we have human in command, or HIC. This is exactly what it sounds like. Humans retain absolute, ultimate authority. They actively control and can totally override any AI recommendation. Take the finance sector, for example. Imagine an AI model predicting whether a bank should approve a business loan. Because the consequences of bias or error here could literally ruin someone's livelihood and violate fair lending laws, the risk is sky high. So a human loan officer must sit in command. They look at the AI's recommendation, sure, but they also consider exceptional circumstances, like maybe a temporary financial hardship that the AI just couldn't grasp. And the human makes the final call. Stepping down just a bit to medium-high risk, we use human in the loop, or HITL. This requires active, real-time human involvement to provide feedback or course correct during the process. A great example here is education. Let's say an AI analyzes academic records to predict which students might be at risk of dropping out. The influence is high, but the direct, immediate consequence is maybe medium. So here, academic counselors act as the human in the loop. They see the AI's risk profile, but before they just blindly throw a student into a mandatory tutoring program, they actually talk to the student. They validate the data, and they use their own qualitative human insight to adjust the plan. And finally, for low-risk environments, we have human on the loop, or HOTL. Here, the system basically runs autonomously, but humans act as a supervisor. They're watching the monitors, intervening only if something weird pops up. Think of a hospital using AI to automate routine patient appointment scheduling. If the AI messes up, yeah, it's an administrative headache. It causes some inconvenience, maybe some delays, but nobody is getting physically hurt. So the human stays on the loop. They let the software do the heavy lifting, but they're ready to jump in if the whole system crashes. Now let's move into Section 4, Why Rigid Rules Fail. Here's a fascinating point. We can't just program a static list of ethical rules into these oversight mechanisms, dust off our hands, and walk away. We're looking at two entirely different approaches here. On one side, you have rule-based systems. We constantly try to just feed AI a list of principles, right? Do no harm, be fair. But rules are inherently reactive. They're brittle, and with tech moving at warp speed, they become obsolete almost instantly. On the flip side, researchers suggest something totally different, Aristotelian virtue ethics. Rather than leaning on a static checklist, this approach is all about training humans to have practical wisdom, what Aristotle called phronesis. It's about developing moral exemplars who can dynamically navigate completely novel, bizarre situations that a rulebook could never, ever anticipate. The research summarizes it so perfectly with this quote. In a rule-based system, humans are likely to be chasing after the right way to live, rather than providing a dynamic, living rubric. We are currently living in a state of what experts call acute technosocial opacity. That's a fancy way of saying we literally cannot see what the future of this technology will look like tomorrow, let alone a decade from now. You just can't write a fixed code of conduct for a future you can't even envision. And that is exactly why human decency, our flexibility, our living, breathing judgment, that has to be our ultimate safeguard. Which brings us home to Section 5, the power of human judgment. So what is it deeply inside of us that makes us so vital to this whole equation? The sci-fi author Ted Chiang makes this absolutely crucial point when he talks about AI and art. He argues that art requires making choices at every single scale. When someone types a prompt into an AI image generator and the machine goes off and makes thousands of micro choices to actually render that image, the human isn't really the author anymore. They just threw out a high-level vision. To keep our agency and to create things that actually hold value and resonate with other human beings, we have to remain the active guiding agents. We can't just be passive supervisors of a machine's output. And the real engine behind making those choices, it's discernment. This is the attentive, careful work that keeps our judgment sharp and responsive, instead of just robotic. As defined by our sources, discernment is this incredible combination of two deeply human traits. First, intuition, which is our ability to sense patterns and implications before we can even put them into words. And second, taste, which is that deeply felt sense of what just fits or feels appropriate. Intuition helps us perceive the world, taste helps us choose our path through it. And together, they produce the kind of good judgment that bridges the gap between cold, raw data and real, ethical action. So how do we practically cultivate this discernment in the age of AI? Well, we have to make our intuition and our taste visible to other people. It has to be an active daily practice. First, by teaching what you've learned. Doing that actually forces you to articulate all that implicit knowledge you're carrying around in your head. Second, by mentoring junior colleagues. Don't just hand them the answer. Show them the math. Reveal the chain of reasoning that lives right beneath your gut feelings. And finally, by openly sharing your missteps in team debriefs to build real transparency. Over time, doing these things builds this amazing culture where human judgment isn't just some mystical, unexplainable secret, but a highly learnable, highly trusted skill that empowers everyone. We've covered so much ground today: the responsibility gap, how to actually measure risk, the oversight frameworks we rely on, and exactly why our own dynamic human judgment will always outmaneuver rigid programmed rules. The ultimate safety net isn't a better algorithm. It's you. It's your lived experience, your practical wisdom, and your very human capacity to care. So I want to leave you with one final question to chew on today. How will you use your intuition and taste to guide the AI in your life? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I absolutely cannot wait to dive into our next topic with you. See you then.